Hello everyone! Last week I released my new game on the Google Play Store. It is made in Godot and is called Cheeky Chicken Holiday Special. It is a Flappy Bird-like with 3D graphics. And just like the original, it is free with ads. Please check it out and give me some feedback. The version on the screen right now is an earlier development version, which is different from the final release. While making the game, I noticed that the slow motion effect didn't look as expected on the phone compared to the PC. The slow-mo just didn't activate on the device. The game also ran clearly at a much lower frames per second on the phone, probably even below 30. I reproduced this bug in my game by limiting the FPS on the PC in the project settings. Setting frame delay MSEC to 33 achieves 30 FPS, and at 66 MSECs the project runs with 15 FPS. At low frame rates the slow-mo indeed doesn't play in my game. I mitigated the problem by setting the engine.timescale property higher and by not slowing down the game by so much. In this video I will give you a rundown of the whole thing. At the end of the video I will also show you how I easily managed to get better FPS on the phone by using a viewport. If you download the game now, you will see that it doesn't run choppy at all. I'm still glad though I caught the unexpected behavior in the first place, just in case. So here's the setup. When the chicken picks up the hot chocolate milkshake cup, it turns into metal chicken and becomes invincible for a time. To communicate this change to the player, the game goes into slow motion and plays a short sequence during which the chicken flashes between metal material and toon material. I set up a 1 second animation node, and every 1/10 of a second I keyframed the other material onto the mesh. After the animation is over, the chicken stays at the material set last. The Godot engine.timescale property works like this. A timescale of 1 plays the game at a regular speed, while a value between 0 and lower than 1 runs everything in the game slower, or at a fraction of the regular speed. This includes all physics and animations or particle effects, timers, you name it. A timescale of over 1 makes everything go faster. The GD script for this goes roughly as follows. On pickup, before I start the slow-mo, I set the Go Metal animation's playback speed to the inverse of the upcoming slow motion timescale, or 1 divided by the slow-mo timescale. If I didn't do that, the Go Metal sequence would play in slow motion too, which doesn't look good and takes too long. That's why I set the Go Metal animation node's individual playback speed to run multiple times faster. When the slow motion kicks in, this results in the Go Metal sequence just playing at its regular speed. After starting the Go Metal animation, I start the slow motion effect by setting the engine.timescale to the slow-mo value. To end the slow-mo, I yield or await the signal emitted at the end of the Go Metal animation, at which point I set the engine.timescale back to 1, or regular speed. This is a pretty standard way to do slow motion in Godot. Turns out, for my game it actually makes a difference what value the timescale is for the slow-mo to work at lower FPS. A value of 0.3 or the game running at a third of its regular speed combined with the game running at 30 FPS wouldn't play the slow-mo at all, while this would work at 60 FPS. I'm not quite sure why that is. Maybe there are not enough frames on screen to render the animation, or to hit the keyframes, so to speak, because the keyframes are too close to each other in the timeline. At 30 FPS, 1/10 of a second contains just 3 frames after all, and there may be some variations in the frame length. Another guess is that when I set the Go Metal playback speed to 1 divided by 0.3 or 3.3 times its regular speed, the animation runs so fast that it finishes during just a few frames and emits the signal to stop the slow-mo just about as the call to start the slow-mo is to be executed, or just a few frames later. In other words, it just comes too early. To solve this, I experimented with some different values and settled on an engine.timescale of just 0.9, which works even in 15 FPS. The game would be barely playable by then, but at least you could experience the slow-mo even on a potato device, just in case. And it still looks good at over 60 FPS. So the takeaway here maybe would be to periodically check how your game runs at lower FPS. As you can see in my dev version footage, the low frame rates also broke my background spawning setup, which was completely timing based and not location based at all, and also driven by an animation node. It didn't make any difference if the animation node ran on the physics or on the idle process, by the way. So the animation node is the one to look at for glitches at lower FPS when changing playback speeds. I don't think this is a bug in the engine, but that it happens just because you can't break down a single frame into half frames or something like that. Or maybe because of how time critical sequential function calls can be and how many calls can be executed per frame. Please comment what you think. In the end, I did find the root for my low FPS on the phone, and it was because of the screen resolution. I knew from the start that I couldn't make the game run in 60 FPS at like 1080p with my programming skills. Plus I didn't want to sink too much time into optimizing anyway. So I set the game's resolution to 704 pixels by 396 pixels from the get-go. What I didn't realize is that Godot doesn't change the screen resolution on the OS level when in full screen. It even says so in the manual, by the way. When testing in the editor, I'm using windowed mode all the time. But on a phone, apps always go into full screen mode. And that means that the game's resolution will also scale up to the phone's screen resolution. At the beginning, I didn't notice the difference, because I was prototyping with default cubes and default materials. But once I got the assets in and got the pixelated look going, I noticed that on the phone the game looked kind of surprisingly smooth and crisp, but ran very choppy. It was almost cinematic, but fortunately all I had to do was to just make a new main scene and put a viewport container in it and set it to the size of the game's resolution. Then I put a viewport into that, which takes the container size, and finally put my previous main scene into that. Now the game stays at 704 by 396 all the time, even in full screen. And yeah, it also stretches to different aspect ratios, no problem. I put the ads from the AdMob plugin on top of that, outside of the viewport, to keep the ads nice and crisp and to keep my advertising overlords happy. You could put your GUI as well outside of the viewport to keep it smooth. But for me at this point it was too late for that, and that crunchy pixelated text is part of the aesthetic of my game anyway. Well, that's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed this little post-mortem. If you did, please like and subscribe, comment, play the game, write a review and give me a rating. I don't have any particular plans for this channel, but I will keep making games in Godot for sure. Thanks for watching and see you later.